Hey everybody, this is Lisa with Memento, Mori Inc. And this is Graeme Reynolds. So I'm going to have you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people who are not familiar with you, all three in the back.
Hi guys, my name is Graham. I am the author of a bunch of things, predominantly the werewolf series High Moor, and its imaginatively named sequels High Moor 2 Moonstruck and High Moor 3 Blood Moon. I also had a novel out called Dark and Lonely Water through Crystal Lake Publishing last year, and I am the head honcho and pointy stick wielder at Horrific Tales Publishing.
Awesome. So one of the things I want to do is, before we jump into the authorship, I'd like to, as a person who owns a publishing company talking to another one, I'd like to dive into that just for a minute because I think sometimes with the new authors coming in, they get a little bit, they get the Hollywood glasses on, right? The rose-colored glasses on. And it's not that way, especially with self-publishing. So just one of the very popular questions that I get asked is, as a publishing company, as a small publishing company, is it reasonable, excuse me, is it reasonable to ask of your new authors coming in to market for themselves a little bit?
It's crucial. There's only so much you can do as a publisher. I find that it doesn't matter how many adverts I run, it doesn't matter how much I particularly push a book. If someone is silent on social media, that book's not really going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about going into all of these places like the Books of Horror group on Facebook, or you've got the horror aficionados and Goodreads and going, buy my book, which is what a lot of the guys do. They become very, very desperate. They become, trying to make themselves stand out, and they just get lost in the noise. So I mean, I'm having this conversation with one of my authors earlier on today, Chantal Naudeluge, who does the Angel Manor series. And she'd been out of it, she'd been off social media for a little while, and she's like, what do I do? How do I get back into it? And it's just like, join these groups, be visible, be social, talk to these people, comment on things, be funny. Once every couple of weeks, make a post and say, oh yeah, hi guys, I know I'm here and I'm posting memes and I'm chatting to you all and I'm being supportive. I got books too. Okay, back to
Mm-hmm.
me being supportive, and that's really the best way of doing it. If people are just trying to constantly push their books, people are just going to tune them out. You've got to be engaging, you've got to really sort of engage with the community, and that will lead to sales, that will lead
Right.
to visibility, because people go, I really like this person, I'm really enjoying talking to this people, hey, they've got a book, I'll check it out.
Right. And so one of the things that I like to tell my author is they're buying you, not the book, right? So yes, they're going to look at the book, they'll say, hey, cool cover, or hey, they may read the back of the book and say, hey, that's a really cool storyline, I'd like to read it. But honestly, with being a self-published author or a small indie author, I think that you have this opportunity to really get to know your readers in a way that they could never touch, like Stephen King, right? So just being able to connect with your readers on a different level than they can with these other authors that they admire, I think it gives you a foot in the door. So do you feel pressure being a CEO and running a publishing company when you put out your books ever?
I feel it crushes me if a book doesn't do as well as it should. Because I mean, each book that I put out, and I haven't put any out for a couple of years, has been
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and I've had a couple of, let's say, bad experiences of late. I got right the way through, I pushed a book for an author that I won't name, but I got right the way to the end 2 weeks before it came out, and he went completely off down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole and started arguing with book
Um,
reviewers about how vaccines were killing people and turning us into lizard men. And I was just like, shit.
yeah.
I asked him, it's like, mind maybe not saying this 2 weeks before the book came out? But no, this is my belief. So I had to bin the lot, and I'd put thousands into that book. I mean, I was
Oh,
like, because he was a name, he was well known,
yeah.
and I really put heart and soul into this. I was taking out print adverts in magazines and things like that with this book, and then I had to
Mhm.
pull the lot 2 weeks before. It's just like no.
Oh no,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, it's one of those things where it pushes me when they don't do well, or I've got some guys who just aren't really very good at social media as well.
Hmm.
You know, there's some books. I mean, I've got one out called Wasteland Gods by Jonathan Woodrow, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. It's probably, you know, it's like kids. You're not supposed to have favorites, but this one's probably
Yeah.
one of my favorites. Um, because it's sort of it's blurring the lines between some really quite brutal horror, but it's also sort of this dark fantasy. It's really Neil Gaiman and Clive Barker meets Richard Limon, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But he never says a bloody word on social media. So every time I
Yeah.
start pushing this thing, because he's not visible, because he doesn't really talk to people, he doesn't join these groups. You know, not
Hmm.
everyone, they put these things out and they have their own lives.
Right.
But at the same time, you can't, you know, I can throw money at these things. And there are some authors where I've thrown thousands of promotions and I've gotten a whole bunch of reviews. And because the social media presence is so important on small press, so
Right.
important because you've got to engage with people, you've got to join these groups, you've got to be part of the community, and that will then get you the traction. And if you just merge it, fade into the background, there are hundreds of thousands of other books and other authors that are going to jump right in there.
Right, exactly. Now let's transition into you being an author. How does that pressure translate into you? Like, I mean, you said you haven't done anything for a couple years, and then you start putting out a book, and you're like, well, what if this like flops? What if what if I give all this advice and then my book kind of doesn't do so hot? Like, you kind of have that pressure of, you know, is what I'm saying going to look like rubbish when I'm doing it myself? Or do you ever run into stuff like that, or do you feel like it is what it
Yeah,
is?
yeah. I mean, the last book that I put out, I did the High Moor books, and I did a couple of short stories. I did a novelette, I suppose, in an anthology that I put out, Leaders of the Pack, where I got people like Ray Garton and Jonathan Jans and Glenn Rolfe, David Wellington. So I got some real big names in this, and I wrote a 13,000 word novelette to go in that as well, because I essentially turned around to these guys and said, right, okay, I'm going to pay you pro rate, and there's no word count limit. Give me what you got, but I want
Nice.
it in your universe. So I love all of your werewolf books. Write me something in your werewolf universe with your characters. That's what these guys went away and did, and I did the same thing, and that did really well. But then I sort of there was a hard decision to make after I had this problem with the author who essentially blew his book up 2 weeks before release. Um,
Hmm.
I had to really seriously take a look after I picked myself up out of the bottle of whiskey that I fell into
Right.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, and take a good long look. And my stuff was outselling everything else that I was putting out by a factor of 10. And it's like, right,
Yeah.
okay. So I need to refocus a little bit. It's like, okay, it's obvious here. I'm not, take notice of the figures, get off your ass and start writing books again.
Hmm. Yeah.
So between Himo 3 and Dark and Lonely Water, which is this one that came out from Crystal Lake Publishing last year.
Yes.
I think there'd probably been about 6 years between me putting a book out, and it was difficult because I gotten myself to a point where I was talking to people, but I was more known as a publisher, and he did those books.
Right.
But if you don't keep putting stuff out, you can also cease to become relevant to an extent. Uh,
Exactly.
so it really is a case of putting these things out. And Dark and Lonely Water, I think it did quite well initially. I think it shocks a few people.
Hmm.
It's dark. I think someone said it's got the ballsiest ending he's ever written for a book.
Nice.
A couple of other people turned around there and was like, "Oh my god!" and just didn't like it because it's like, "Oh, did I go too far? Maybe."
Yeah. Is there
Um,
too far though? Is there really?
but I think the difficulty that I had with that is I've always, I started off self-publishing High Noah.
Hmm.
And when that did well, and the second book did well, I then started Horrific Tales. And really, I started the publishing company to try to give a little bit of validity to the books, because back when this first book came out in 2011, there was a whole thing. You still get a certain amount of snobbery about the self-publishing, but
Oh
because
yeah.
it was quite new at the time, it was awful. And
Yeah.
you go to the writers' conventions like oh, I don't know, like StokerCon or World Horror or FantasyCon in the UK, and you'd see a lot of the properly the traditionally published authors, and they would look down the nose at it. So it's right, okay. Rather than this being, coming out by Graeme Reynolds, I thought I'll put a publishing company around it. And the ethos that I always had was, okay, I'm going to do what the big boys do. I am going to throw money at these things. I am going to make sure that they are professionally edited. And I go
Hmm.
through like a three-stage editorial process with all of my books. There's a structural edit, then there's a line edit, then there's a proofread. So they get, you know, as well as me sort of having a look at it when I'm obviously looking at the submissions.
Right.
So there's always at least three sets of eyes go across these things, plus beta readers as well. So I try
Hmm.
to get it, stuff still gets through, but then you go back and fix it when people flag up and say, "Oh, by the way, there's a typo." It's just
Of course, yeah,
then
always.
you go in and sort it out.
Yeah.
A little bit harder to do if people find a typo with the audiobook, but then my audiobook guy tends to point these things out as he's going through because it sounds off. But yeah,
Yeah.
so the ethos was always try to do it as well as I can. A lot of people say, "Oh, self-published stuff," and you still get the odd one. People go through there and do NaNoWriMo, where they'll go and churn out a 50K novel in a month and then just chuck the thing straight on Amazon with an AI cover. So
Yes.
yeah, there is that noise, but at the same time, you can, if you do put a lot of time and effort into the quality of your product, and you actually take pride in what you're doing. And there are guys
Hmm.
out there, a lot of guys out there that do that as well. There's a lot of very, very good small presses, and make sure that you actually pay people.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, you see so many of these scandals where you've got small presses treating the money that's coming in and the author's money like their own personal piggy bank, and it's just like, look,
Hmm.
don't do that. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
that's not your money. When that money
Right.
comes in, okay, if there's an advance, you take that out, but do your maths, pay your bloody authors what's left over.
Hmm.
If you don't want to invest that in new books, okay, use that as your personal piggy bank if you want, but you don't spend your bloody authors' money. It's
Right.
But you get so many of these places that just overextend themselves and go, oh, I'll just take a little bit of it now, I'll be able to pay it back. And then all of a sudden you end up with these presses imploding. And you see it all the time.
Hmm.
You've got to
Yeah.
behave, treat your authors with respect, and you've really got to try to do your best for their books.
Right.
So, as I say, getting back to the original question, that when you can't do that, when you do everything that you can, and for some whatever reason the book just doesn't take off, it's quite gutting, really. But that is the
Right.
business. And then you have other ones where you think, okay, this is quite good, but because the author's very, very good at social media or whatever, or the right person gets hold of it and it gets a bit of buzz around it, and it takes off, and there's not really anything you can do to manufacture that.
Right.
And it would be
Yeah.
nice if we could bottle that and say, right, okay, here are the steps. I'm going to follow these steps each time.
Yeah. And sometimes you follow all the steps the right time and you still fall down the last one, right? And you brought
Yeah.
up a lot of really good points because a lot of times, publishers do fall into that where they're, putting all their money into something and then they find an author that maybe just shuts down or, they feel one of the biggest things I hear all the time is, you get the social media drain, right? Like they're like, I'm just so overwhelmed by it. I can't and we're creative so that does kind of bog down our creativity but it's a necessary evil and then you get the authors who think that the publisher has to do everything and that they don't have to do anything and they can say whatever they want and I'm like listen have your platform before you sign with me so I know what you're all about and I can decide from there, right? Like don't just pop this on me and be like, well, I should be able to say what I want. So it's a two-edged sword in some sense. And when you're talking to an author, when I was getting new authors, I would interview them and see what they're about. They were they were pulling the wool over like just be real because I'm not just signing your book on, I'm signing you, I'm putting my name behind you as an author and if we're not a good fit and that's what I tell them all the time if we aren't a good fit that's okay but they get so excited about getting a contract but I was just like okay well we have our own things that we stand for too right so when you come in and bring your energy to mine it has to mesh well But to move forward, I really want to get into your books because you do have the High Moor series. You do have a lot of werewolf books. I want to know what it is about the werewolves that you love so much, as opposed to other monsters, or, for example, as opposed to vampires, because I'm kind of partial to them myself. So I want to hear what your
Yeah.
opinion is on them.
Okay. Get ready. There's quite a lot to this.
Let's go.
So there's a lot of strands to this one, I suppose. I think one of the earliest things is we used to, I don't know if you had them in the States, but we used to have these sort of Usborne monster books when we were
Mhm.
kids, when I was growing up, so like 7 or 8 years old, and you'd have these kids books really, and they'd have the most horrifying pictures in them. Like literally these, and I can remember just from one of my earliest memories flicking through these things there. I used to when I'd read these books over and over and over again, so I'd memorize them. And the werewolf one I always used to flick past because the picture was so terrifying. It had bright red eyes and blood all coming out of its mouth, and you'd read through it and skim past it. And then I can remember watching one of the first colour horror movies that I was allowed to watch was Curse of the Werewolf with Oliver Reed.
Mhm.
We used to have on one of our TV shows, the channels back in the sort of the late 70s and early 80s. Late at night, they used to show a lot of, they'd have these horror double bills on the Friday and Saturday nights where they would show all black and white classic monster movies, like, your Frankensteins, your Draculas, some of the other things like the old, the old Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi stuff. And we got a video recorder, so my dad would record these and then watch them on Saturday morning to see if I was allowed to watch it, if it wasn't
Yeah.
too scary for me. So I grew up on a diet of this, and I can remember watching this as one of the first colour ones I was ever allowed to see. And it was amazing. It was fascinating because the protagonist was also the antagonist.
Right. Mhm.
Um, and that was just that blew my mind. I was like, so 8 or 9 years old, and it's just like the guy that you're rooting for is also the monster. How can that work? How
Right.
can that was just fascinating to me because you didn't want the monster to die,
Yeah.
because you were concerned about that. And then we had growing up a little bit more, I suppose. So fast forward in a few years, there was there was and there was a Boy Scout camp that I went on. Now this scene pretty much made it into the first book. You've read the book, I take it you're laughing.
Yes.
Um, I must have been about 10 or 11 years old, and I was at a Boy Scout camp, and pretty much exactly as it's written in the book. And we were all around the campfire and talking about these, the horror books that they had. There was an old horror bookshop that had all of these lurid covers, and we never wouldn't dare buy them. We never had any money, but we'd go in there after school and just look at the covers. You look at things like The Incredible Melting Man, and there was one called Wolfen by Whitley Strieber.
Mhm.
Um, and I'd said, "Oh yeah, I love the look of that cover." And one of them pretended that he'd read it, and he hadn't. He was lying. And he said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, no, it's a werewolf comes in and just like kill. There's a scene in there where you're in a Boy Scout camp, and it comes and rips all of these kids apart in the tents and stuff like that." And it scared the shit out of me to the point that at 1 o'clock in the morning, I decided that I wasn't going to hang around waiting for a werewolf to come and rip me to bits. So
Mhm.
I packed my shit together and I headed off down country lanes, 15 miles. The
Yeah.
scout leader woke up the next day. And it's just like, what do you mean he's gone? um, and so they turned up there. My parents let me in, and he turned up looking quite ill a few hours later.
Yes.
I got my orienteering badge for that though.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Um, so there was that as well, and obviously that scene sort of stuck with me because when I eventually did read the book, that wasn't in there. This kid was lying, but I think that was the kernel. That was what the High Moor books grew out of. That
Yeah.
primal terror that I had as a child that this was going to happen. So it's just like, oh right, okay. So I think it started off, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do it as a short story or not.
Mhm.
But it started off with that scene, and then it sort of there was backstory, and then carrying it on to its conclusion afterwards. And it really was a case of what happens next, what happens next, what happens next.
Right.
There wasn't so much plotting. I kind of did an awful lot of editing to make all of these different character threads in to leave, and there was a lot of timing going on there. I've got sort of
Yes.
date timestamps on all of the chapter headings because that was, as much as anything, that was for me to keep track of it. And I was looking at things like, going into such an obscene amount of detail, like when the moon was actually rising. So all of those moonrise times and things like that, those are exact because I looked every single one of them up.
Oh,
And
that's
then I
awesome.
cross-referenced them against things that really happened in that time. So there's a
Yeah.
part, nobody knows this sort of stuff. It's all just things that you put in. But there's a bit, I think, where John, the main character, is in his bedroom and his father's downstairs watching the World Cup, the football on TV.
Yeah.
And
That was
yeah,
really going on. Yeah. And you
that
know
that,
what though? Somebody's gonna know that. But it's gonna be something obscure, but somebody's gonna be like, man, I that brought back a memory for me because I remember that night. And yeah, that's gonna really
yeah.
it's gonna touch
So
somebody.
the times
Mhm.
actually, the dates and times line up with those things. So
Yes.
his dad's watching it and he's swearing because there's quite a famous Maradona on the game against England. So does that and punches the ball into the back of the net. So while his dad's downstairs swearing at that, that's the exact
Mm,
moment that the full moon rose, which and everything that comes along with that. So it allowed me to sort of
yeah.
the current event, the real life circumstance, and create tension at
Right.
the same time. Um, so
Yes.
so
No,
I,
I
I
love that. I love that detail for sure.
yeah, it's stuff that nobody ever, most people are never going to know about it. But I think it tends to add a
Yeah.
depth and actually having
I
all of
don't think they know it consciously sometimes, but I think little details like that are what make them stick in our minds and we don't realize it. So I really appreciate you sharing that because it's those kinds of things that leave the breadcrumbs in our mind. And those, like I said, there's some people will say like that story really stuck with me, and they really can't place why. They may think it's a scene, or maybe they know the scene, but they don't know why that scene stuck with them. But those little details of making it real, right? They have a lasting memory in our readers' mind. So that's a really awesome point that you brought up there. Cool.
it's one of the things that I like using real locations for as well.
Yeah.
I do an awful lot I mean, some of the stuff I actually physically went there. My parents
Mhm.
live in a part of the country where the book takes place, or most of the book takes place. So there were times, I think, on the original cover for the second book, for example,
Mhm.
um, that's using a real world location and the church at the back of it. I've got a copy
Yeah,
right here.
please show.
But again, it's sort of this sort of obsessive compulsive. It's quite difficult to see on there.
Mm.
You've got two werewolves fighting over this sort of ruined uh,
Yeah, okay.
church and this ruined abbey. Now, the ruined abbey, that's a photograph that I actually took.
Mm.
Um, and I went so far as to work out the times for the where the position the moon would be in the sky
Nice.
at the time that the scene was taking place, and then go on a sunny day and take a photograph where the sun was in the exact same place, so the shadows would be right.
Yes. Yes. That's great. That's
But
great.
I'd sort of
So can you
scout,
show it? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd scout these places on Google Maps because
Uh,
sometimes, I'd look at it from the perspective of, right, okay, my character is, this is the second book I'm talking about there, but I've got a character who's a werewolf who's been transported from a police station to a prison.
mm,
Moon's going up and he's stuck in the back of a police van. So I'm like, right, okay, what is the location? What is the route? And then when I
yeah.
saw where the route would take me, it's just like, oh, right, okay. And I was able to then have a look at the local area, and actually we've got these ruins, which is a place called Finchel Abbey, which is sort of, it's a 14th century monastery that's all ruins by the riverbank. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, that's physically there. Okay, great. So I can go and have a look at this, and then and that then becomes a scene, and it almost becomes a character in of itself because you've got
Right.
these ancient ruins and a bunch of werewolves beating hell out of each other.
So we are running a little bit out of time, so I want to
Sure.
really quickly get to the covers of your book so you can show us what you got.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, you'll show those for us.
Right. What I'm going to
And
show
as
you.
you do,
Oh, yeah.
tell us where we can find you, where you're most active at.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to show you. This is the 10th anniversary box set that I did
So
for the
beautiful. Yes, so
And this
beautiful.
basically got all of the books plus every collected short story plus internal illustrations, and you can see that I redid the cover art for all of these.
They're beautiful.
And then the books, each book's got it's got all of the short stories, but it's also got see if I can find some, you know, color. It's got, this is one of the black and white illustrations, but it's black and white color illustrations, and I've also done some essays about how I had the inspiration for the books, what my influences were. There's one of them that's quite candid where I looked at mental illness that I suffer from. I
Yeah.
have borderline personality disorder, and again, how that sort of ties in the loss of control to the sort of and the
Yeah.
self-image to the werewolf side of things. So again, there's that as well. So I cover that in those. That's quite a limited edition one. That's sort of a 150 limited copies. There's a Leader of the Pack anthology, which is the one I mentioned before, which has got again, it's sort of illustrated. These are black and white, and these are the ones with so see the picture there for my
No,
story
it's
with
gorgeous. And who's the
um
illustrator?
the illustrator this and the internal illustrations was a lady called Michelle Molini,
All
who's a
right.
very, very talented artist. The cover art is done by Ben Baldwin for the main one. This one, it's a guy called Patrick Cornett, who's a US citizen. And then I've got Dark and Lonely Water, which is my more recent novel. It's quite a short novel, this one. And that is a blend of, I suppose, ancient folklore, the legend of Jenny Greenteeth. And I've merged it with a modern urban myth, which is the Manchester Pusher, where there's a theory that there's a serial killer in the northwest of England who's
Mm.
drowning people. And there are documentaries on this. And I dug right into the folklore and then come up with a narrative. It's quite fast paced, I suppose. It's very much one of my stories. So there's a lot of very dark humor in there. There's some
Yeah.
quite compelling characters that aren't all very necessarily very nice, but they're interesting. And again, it's got quite a vicious ending. And then I've just had a story printed in this one, which was one of Kevin Kennedy's books,
Yep.
KGK and on werewolves. And I'm currently writing a occult detective book.
Okay.
That's currently titled Night Bleeds into Dawn. I'm about halfway through that, hoping to get it out by the end of the year. I suppose try to imagine sort of Miss Marple if she was an alcoholic inner city expert who lives in a bedsit above a Chinese restaurant,
Mm.
meets the Evil Dead. But again,
Nice.
that's tying into Dark and Lonely Water is in the High Movie universe, and Night Bleeds into Dawn is in the High Movie universe. There's little bits of discussion, I suppose, and little Easter eggs that's in there. But I
Mm.
do have some ideas as to how I'm going to start bringing these things together into the next lot of series that I'm going to do. But yeah, after I get these out the way with the Night Bleeds into Dawn out the way with, I'm going to start looking back into werewolves again.
Awesome. Yeah. I love werewolves, so I'm never gonna, you can never have too many. I have worked with some of the people that you work with, so we kind of been in the same circle. So I hope that eventually we do get to work together because I think it would be awesome. I'd
That'd
love
be
to share
cool.
that love of werewolves with you. And where are you most active on social media?
Almost entirely on Facebook. I've come away from Twitter. I think it's not necessarily a good place.
Yeah,
Facebook, I'm part of the community there. I'm quite active on the Books of Horror group. If you want to
same.
drop by that, that's one of the biggest ones on Facebook. But yeah, hit me up. I'm Graeme.Reynolds too because someone got in there before me apparently. But hit me up. I'll drop you a link. I accept almost all friend requests. You know, however, if people turn out to be not so nice, I will quite
Yeah,
quickly get rid
there's
of
no
it.
time for that. There's no time for
Yeah,
that. And so as far as the Graham Reynolds 2, right? Is it Graham Reynolds 2 or Graham 2 Reynolds?
Graeme.Reynolds too.
Okay. And then for the publishing company, is it separate or you have it on the same?
That's Horrific Tales Publishing. So again, that's Facebook. There is still a Twitter account for that, but it doesn't get updated very much. And I'm investigating Blue Sky, but again, it seems to be quite difficult to get much traction on that. It's kind of like shouting into a void at the moment.
Yeah. I'm still working on the blue sky thing too. I don't get it. Threads too. I'm kind of like,
Yeah,
why? We have all this other stuff, and we had talked about it where authors kind of get burnt out on the social media. So I'm like, I always try to focus on just one. I'm not really active on the Facebook
I
and
kind of feel
with
like I
books of
should
horror
be
as
on
well.
TikTok.
Yeah.
At the same time, you don't want a 52-year-old guy going on there and doing videos and things like that. It's
You'd
possibly.
be surprised.
I don't even.
You'd be
I'm not
really
even sure what I
surprised.
want to know.
So my final question for you is I always ask this kind of question for the people that I interview. I've interviewed a couple people who are sort of new to writing and authorship and publishing, and we both have a little bit more experience. Probably you have a little bit more than I do. What would you tell yourself just starting out if I could skip all the advice and just choose this one? If I just would have known this in the beginning, things would have been a lot better for me. What would that be?
The first draft of everything is shit. Give yourself permission to just write. You're telling yourself the story with the first draft. Get it down. You can edit, you can fix, you can't do anything with a blank page. Go through there, hammer it out, write it down. I use a free write now, and it's been a
Mm-hmm.
game changer for me because you can't edit on it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's like a little e-ink typewriter that I carry
Yeah.
when I get out of the house so that I don't have kids or dogs or chores and things like that. I will go and sit in a coffee shop, or I'll go and sit by a lake. I'll go and sit somewhere, and I will just sit down there, and it's just a typewriter with a little e-ink screen and no editing capability. So you
Oh,
can't fix
wow.
it. You just sit down there, and it's just like, right, I'm going to sit and I'm going to write. And then it uploads to the cloud, and I put it into a main document and edit it later. But for just getting it out there, it's great. It's amazing.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that's probably a lot of authors have that hang up, right? They just want to make sure that first draft is so perfect. And I'm like, it's shit. No matter what you do to it, it's shit.
Yeah.
It's word vomit until you go through it again, right? And then after you're done with that portion, like you get the whole thing out in the first draft, do you sort of take a minute or do you go kind of dive right into it and see what you came up with?
I kind of, I kind of, what I used to do, which is why it took me so long to write things, was I would write a chapter, and then I would read the chapter back, editing as I went, before I then started on the next one, and that just took too damn long. So,
Yeah.
but now what I'm doing is I'm incorporating the changes. So I take like a scene, and that's what I tend to work in. I think I started out in flash fiction, so I tend to write in 1,000 to 1,500 word chunks. So my scenes tend
Hmm.
to be short, which it works for me. It means that the book is quite fast paced because my scenes are quite short. But yeah, so I'll just go through there. And I'll just run through it, and I'll spell check it. I'll run it through Grammarly, and then ignore half of the things that it says because it's just coming up with garbage. Um, so it means that by the time the first draft is finished, I've also been sort of going back there and just tweaking it. It's just I'm doing that as a separate activity, not
Hmm.
part of the writing process. I'm not letting it get in the way. I'm flow writing and then bolting it into the main story, so at least it's readable by the time I get to the end of the first draft. Then it'll be a case of saying, right, what works, what doesn't work, going away, looking at it honestly from the structural perspective, seeing how that goes, fixing that and saying, okay, actually, I've got two characters here, and this could just be one character, or yeah, this just kind of meanders a little bit there. Maybe I just need to kill somebody.
Yeah, exactly. You can never go wrong with
Yeah.
just get rid of
What
that guy.
should I do? People are going to be dropping to sleep, right? Okay. Which characters do we like? Okay, they're dead.
Exactly. The favorite one, it's dead. Yeah.
Yes. Killing the darlings.
Well, it was so fantastic to get to know you a little bit and to share some time with you. I really appreciate you coming on. Again, you can tell us where to find you one last time, and I will go ahead and put those up on
Yeah.
the links as well.
You can find me on graemereynolds.com. The publishing website is horrifictales.com or .co.uk. I'm on Facebook. It's graham.reynolds2.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You have a
So
fantastic
thanks for having me,
weekend.
Lisa. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.